Georgia fans are still debating on whether or not the 2024 season should be viewed as a success or a failure. Part of that is because of the unrealistic expectations. Yes, a little bit unrealistic expectations that this program has now laid out there and that Kirby Smart has now laid out there in the standard for Georgia. Follow along with me and just listen to this real quick about what happened in 2024 for the Georgia Bulldogs. And then you tell me whether or not you think it was a success or a failure. Starting wide receiver, Thomas, gets kicked off the team. He has off-the-field issues. He's off the team before the season even starts. Georgia's down a starting wide receiver that's supposed to be one of their best. Colby Young plays a few games. He gets suspended from the team. Off-the-field issues are right there. Georgia's two biggest receiver threats in Thomas and Colby Young gone for the majority of the season in terms of Colby Young, the entire time in terms of Thomas. Trevor Etienne, the starting running back Georgia brought in, he misses a game at the beginning of the season due to off-the-field issues, so Georgia doesn't get off to the start they want with him. Then he ends up missing a few games due to an injury, en route to it being one of the worst rushing years in Georgia history, the worst since 2006. It's been a long time. I've said it over and over. It's been a long time since Georgia has ran the ball this poorly. On top of the poor running game, you've got potentially the two best pass catchers on your team not out there. Tate Ratledge missed some time. He got hurt up in Lexington against Kentucky. That's your All-American guard. Jared Wilson, starting center and going to the NFL draft, he missed a few games. Georgia played the toughest road schedule in college football. It had to go to Kentucky. It had to go to Texas out in Austin. It had to go to Alabama at night. Austin was at night. Kentucky was at night. It had to deal with, Clemson in a neutral site. Not as tough, but still neutral site for Clemson. Neutral site for Florida. It's a team that had to travel and play a very tough road test in addition to the rest of its schedule, which was not necessarily a slouch when you think about top 10 Tennessee being involved in that game. They almost lost to Kentucky, right? It was one of the worst offensive performances I've seen out of Georgia. It was a good defensive performance, but Georgia en route to one of the worst offensive performances I can remember from the Dogs. They gut it out and they win by 1 point up there. They go to Alabama on the road. And in the game of the year, and in the most dramatic game of the year, they get down 30-7. They end up coming back and leading the game 34-33, miraculously, and then loses on a heartbreaker to that Ryan Williams play, to that Jalen Milroe play. And they lose out there in Tuscaloosa, and Kirby, all of a sudden, the Alabama bug is kind of back, and Kalen DeBoer outdueled Kirby in their first meeting. They had to go to Texas. They had to deal with a bad call and it getting reversed and trash being thrown on the field. And at that point, the country was doubting the Georgia Bulldogs and had to deal with that. They got shut down by Ole Miss in the rain. I did not mention the fact that they had to go to Ole Miss when I was talking about the road schedule and it being the toughest in the country because there were so many games I forgot about it for a second. But they had to go to Ole Miss. They had to go to Oxford. And it poured rain, and the Dogs got slapped in the face. And they went out there and they lost. And afterwards, the field was rushed on them. And you've got people up in C.J. Allen's face. I don't think you want to fight him. I don't think you want to fight Jalen Walker. But you've got people heckling them, and that's not as important as some of these other things. But Carson Beck, there's no way to put it, had an interception fest in the middle of the season. Right? He throws 12 in 5 games. He throws 3 against Texas. He throws 2 against Mississippi State. He threw 3 against Alabama, threw, I believe, 3 against Florida. Right? He had multiple games with 3 interceptions. They had to deal with him struggling, along with the offensive line struggling, along with the wide receivers struggling, along with the running game. Everything on the offense was not clicking. In the midst of all that, you're getting barely any production out of Lawson Lucky. Oscar Delp is like a non-factor up until November. All of those things happen. I'm not done with this list. Had to go to 8 overtimes to beat Georgia Tech on Black Friday. 8 overtimes on Black Friday. It was the second longest college football game ever. They went to 8 overtimes. They barely won in Athens after they're down at halftime. All right, so this Georgia team showed it can come back from a lead. And then you get into the postseason. You got to play Texas again. And what happens? Carson Beck gets hurt. The starting quarterback for the Georgia Bulldogs got hurt. He tore his UCL. Gunnar Stockton goes in there, and they go on, and they actually gut it out. And they win. And they almost lost that game, right? Gunnar Stockton threw a bad interception, and they almost ended up losing that game too. So they're missing their starting quarterback heading into the college football playoff. They get down there, and there's a terrorist attack. A terrorist attack that I think still kind of haunts all of us that were down there. And the game gets suspended. Georgia's dealing with the backup quarterback being in there. And all of the microcosms that were problems for Georgia end up happening pretty much all in one game. And it's interesting because Georgia's defense played really well. It allowed one touchdown, a 13-yard touchdown drive, one play touchdown drive to Riley Leonard and the Notre Dame offense. And Georgia lost that game 23-10. Georgia won the SEC championship. They won the SEC championship, and they beat their rivals. They beat Auburn. They beat Florida. They beat Georgia Tech. They beat Texas twice. They went out on the road and beat Texas. They almost beat Alabama. So was this season a success or a failure? It's the hardest to judge in a long time. It really is. Because you look at 2023 and you say, hey, I think that season was a little bit of a failure. Why? Because the expectation was a three-peat, and the team certainly looked like it could three-peat. My argument has shifted more and more towards this is a success, right? And it's more nuanced than that. What really is true is probably it's somewhere in between of, look, they fell short of their ultimate goals, but they reached a lot of other ones on the way, and it was a hell of a season in terms of excitement. But what Georgia had to go through, and the fact that they still made the college football playoff, still had a bye in the college football playoff, won the SEC championship, you get to add a trophy to the trophy case off of a season where all of those things that I just listed off happened. I mean, if I told you all of those things, the Beck interceptions, the road schedule, the injuries, the suspensions, and I told you this in August, and I said, hey, look, all of these things are going to happen to Georgia. How far do you think they're going to go? I would have told you they lost 4 games in the regular season. That's what I would have told you. If you told me about all those things, I would have said that this was an 8-4 team in the regular season. Maybe. No, it was 10-2 in the regular season, and it was a team that went on to win the SEC championship. So I think it is a success of a season, relatively speaking. I mean, you can't expect, and that's part of the problem, are the unrealistic expectations for a program this high. And they're unrealistic at other places too. They're unrealistic at Bama. Total failure, if you go and ask about Alabama fans, total failure what happened to Alabama this season and eventually getting to the ReliaQuest Bowl and losing that to Michigan. People would say it's a failure, and it is. Ohio State, if it didn't win the national championship this year, people would have seen it as a complete failure, especially with how good that roster was. Oregon, I bet, feels like they failed a little bit. Even though they won the Big Ten championship in the first year, undefeated, I bet they still feel like they fell short. The powers in college football have high expectations, and the fact is that Georgia is one of those powers. But when you really take into account everything that went down during the 2024 season, it's hard to say, man, to a certain point, you kind of got to pat Kirby on the back. You kind of got to pat the Dogs on the back and say, despite all that, you still won the conference, and it still is the most competitive conference in college football. It wasn't the best conference this year, at least at the top end. That was the Big Ten. When you think about Ohio State, Notre Dame, or Ohio State, Penn State, and Oregon. But this was the most competitive conference in college football this season, and it usually is the best conference, TBD, on if it will be or not in the 2025 season. It hasn't happened yet, so I don't know. But Georgia won that after everything. And after one of the wildest years in college football I've ever seen, this was only things that happened in the SEC. Certainly, plenty of bizarre things happened around the rest of college football, but Georgia, I think you have to look at it as at least a little bit of a success. When you bring a trophy home and you beat your rivals and you win 11 games and you have a chance to compete for a national championship, you're missing your quarterback. It was a good year for Georgia. It was a memorable year. I will never forget the last 8 months of my life, 7 months of my life. I get to be a part of all this, and it was very crazy. But I think when you think about what happened in Atlanta in December, I think you have to at least look at this and say, damn, Georgia got it done to an extent. Didn't get it done in the end. Didn't get it done in the end last year. Last year was more of a failure, and that's the sad truth of it when you think about a football team. I don't know that you can say that about this squad after everything that I just named. Thank you for watching.